Welcome into this week's edition of the Creighton Basketball Newsletter. I'm Jon Nyatawa, here to talk the latest in Jays hoops. Creighton is coming off a really dramatic and impressive and gutsy, maybe a little lucky win at Marquette. The Jays survived in double overtime with a 75-69 victory over the Golden Eagles, and that improved Creighton's record to 2-0 in Big East play. The Jays had that long layoff, 15 days between games. So they've only played twice in the last 3 weeks, but they're 2-0 in league play, and that hasn't happened since the 2013-14 season. So there's a lot to be excited about if you're a Creighton fan, but there's also, obviously, you watched the game, I'm sure, on Saturday against Marquette. There's some things that are potentially concerning. So I wanted to highlight just three sort of takeaways from Marquette and a little bit of the Villanova win a few weeks back. As Creighton enters, I mean, because a couple games got canceled, you look at the start of Big East play for the Jays, like, it's a really tough stretch. And they're 2-0, they feel good, but then they got to go to Villanova. They host Providence, which is perhaps the hottest team in the country right now, and is atop the league standings. And then the Jays go to Xavier, which was, in my opinion, a top 2 or 3 team in the league coming into the season. Ton of veterans, a lot of talent. So you could argue potentially that's 3 of the top 4 teams maybe in league play that are right there on Creighton's schedule, and 2 of them are on the road, and one of which, Villanova, Creighton just played and beat. So you know the Wildcats are going to be hungry. So it's a really challenging stretch upcoming over the next week and a half for Creighton. Could be a pretty revealing stretch. Yeah, just a couple of takeaways from Marquette that I wanted to touch on. Before I do that, I just want to remind you, if you have not subscribed to our newsletter, please do it. If you have friends who are Creighton fans who you think might be interested in learning more about the Jays and getting some more takes and analysis and reactions to the pretty wild and fun season that's unfolding before our eyes, let them know. Omaha.com/newsletters is where you can find it. Just click the little box, that little check mark, and all of a sudden you'll start getting some Creighton content in your email inbox every week. So the Marquette game, I mean, obviously you got to commend Creighton for some resilience. While you may shake your head a little bit about the Jays and went to that offensive lull there and let Marquette get back into the game. It was a 17-point lead that Creighton had built, and that dwindled away. It was basically gone by the 7 or 6 minute mark of the second half. But Creighton was backed up into a hole. I mean, obviously the idea of losing a lead and having to find a way to survive in regulation, Creighton did that, so you commend them for that. But also in overtime, I mean, Marquette was up 5 with the ball with 90 seconds left in overtime. Usually you don't come out of that sequence, that situation, still alive. Obviously, Creighton had to hit or get a clutch shot from Alex O'Connell at the buzzer at the end of the first overtime. But, like, you know, Jay's down 5, opponent has the ball. And the clock's winding down. There's a minute and a half left in the first overtime. You're not going to win many games like that. So Creighton did what it needed to do. I think that's right when Creighton switched to a zone and got a couple stops defensively. They got some guys to the free throw line, hit some key free throws, and then Alex O'Connell made the big shot to force it to second overtime, and that's when Creighton was able to pull away and get the win. So. I wanted to start with that, just complimenting them for their grit, and we've said that a lot this year. This team, the way that it's made up, its DNA, they're fighters, and even when they might take a couple hits, some body shots, they have been able to pick themselves up and produce a run or swing the momentum back in their favor. And that hasn't always worked out. They haven't always won these games, and we've seen that. They're 10-3. But it shows up, and it shows up rather consistently, and it might have been the biggest key to the win on Saturday, their ability to shake off, the miscues and find a way to win. So one thing that I noted, just, the way teams are defending Creighton, it seems that obviously they want to pack in the paint. Creighton's really, one of Creighton's strengths has been getting downhill or playing through its big men. They're top 20 in the country in 2-point field goal percentage. So I think teams are trying to seal off the paint as best they can against the Jays, which just opens some things up along the perimeter. Creighton hit 11 three-pointers against Marquette. That's the most that it's hit all season long. And against Villanova, the Jays hit 9, which is the third most. So in the last 2 games that Creighton's played, shot 37% from three-point range. That's better than what it has been. And obviously shooting them at a higher volume, a higher rate. Kind of like what we're used to from the Jays in terms of the percentage of shots from three-point range versus what we had seen at the start of the year when Creighton was really, we're trying to maybe gain some confidence as shooters, relying on their interior attacks. And so I'm curious to see if Creighton's cool with that, if the Jays are able to continue to play inside out and get those in rhythm jumpers and hit them down or knock those shots down with confidence, or if they have to keep finding new ways to manufacture easy buckets on the interior. Like if they have to be a little bit more creative on combating some of the strategies that teams are using to push them out of the paint. They're clogging the lane with bodies and trying to force Creighton to not work inside out. Are there ways that the Jays can adjust? And I think there are, by the way, but they also might be comfortable taking some of these shots because they've got some good shooters on the team that maybe just haven't proven it yet. A lot of them are young, and so they need some reps and they need some moments when the spotlight's on where they see that shot go in. So I don't know if that's a concern. I mean, it's just sort of an observation I had, and it's just 2 games, so that's not a very big sample size. But it's something to keep monitoring is that rate of three-point shot that the Jays are, how often they're taking those shots, and obviously how often they go in, but just what teams are doing and how Creighton's responding to those strategies is interesting to me, especially on Wednesday when the Jays play Villanova, because Villanova just saw this team and the Jays hit 9 threes against them, and I thought played really efficient basketball offensively. How do the Wildcats adjust to try to take away some of the things that Creighton likes to do? That'll be something to watch. Another thing is interior defense for Creighton, which has been a strength all season, but Marquette kind of exposed some things against the Jays in terms of operating out of ball screens that could be concerning. We'll see. I mean, the one caveat to acknowledge, and this is what Coach McDermott said and Alex O'Connell said after game 2, was just the Jays were a little bit fatigued in the second half. That layoff, you're not in game shape, and so they had a feeling that if the game it's just a different intensity and energy that's required to play in a Big East game versus what you're doing on the practice court. And you can try all you can to stay at that peak level, but if you're not playing regularly, it's hard to be there. And so Creighton suffered from that a little bit. So maybe wholesale changes aren't needed necessarily defensively, but it is you got to note it, that Marquette scored 44 points in the paint, matching the most of a Creighton opponent all year. And when the Golden Eagles were able to work themselves back in the game down the stretch, like Creighton had a 9-point lead with 5.5 minutes left in regulation. Marquette scored on 7 of its final 9 possessions, and 6 of those 7 shots that the Golden Eagles made were right there in the lane at the rim. And so it was concerning enough for Creighton to switch to a zone eventually, right? Because the Jays couldn't solve that problem in the moment in terms of what they were doing within their man-to-man defense against ball screens. So they just went to a zone, and that ended up working because Marquette didn't hit perimeter jump shots. But now that the Jays have time to sort of reassess and reevaluate and look at the film a little bit and maybe teach some fundamental lessons, maybe that's all it takes. I don't know, but maybe also a tactical switch is needed. So we'll see as Creighton's going to be tested against some of these teams. Villanova, again, just saw Creighton and what it likes to do defensively. How do they adjust, and what does Creighton have to do differently too? Something to watch. The other thing is Ryan Kalkbrenner. As effective as he was, and he was really good against Marquette, 20 points, 12 rebounds, 4 blocks, 2 steals. I mean, he was an incredible force for the Jays on the interior on both ends of the floor, like he's been for the large part of the year. He played essentially like the whole game. There were only 2 stretches. I think he subbed out for 2.5 minutes in the first half and subbed out for 2 minutes in the second half. But aside from that, basically played 45 minutes of the 50. And so That's not sustainable, obviously. I mean, Ryan Kalkbrenner is in better shape, and that the coaches have complimented him for the stamina that he's built up and the ability to play through fatigue at times. But, you know, I don't think that that's the formula that the Jays want to replicate on a consistent basis going forward. So what can the Jays do the problem is he's been so good, it's like hard to take him off the floor. You reward him for what he's done, all the work he's put in, and the results are obvious. But what can the Jays do to maybe give him a little bit more of a break so that he's operating on full, at the highest level on full cylinder in February and in March? And so whether that's kind of building up Keyshawn Fiesel's confidence a little bit and getting him, finding him helping him play to his strengths a little bit more, or experimenting a little bit with that 5, or maybe a little bit more a small ball lineup with Ryan Hawkins at the 5 and Arthur Kaluma at the 4. I think Creighton showed that lineup just a little bit against Villanova and has shown it at times. Maybe that's something the Jays can go to as well. But, you know, the season-long wear and tear on a big guy like Ryan Kalkbrenner, I don't think you want him. Obviously, you don't want him going 44, 45 minutes every night, and they won't have to because they're not going to go double OT every night. But to only have a couple breaks is a lot to ask of a big guy. As good as he has been and as helpful as it has been to have him on the floor, the Jays probably got to find moments to give him a rest. So those are 3 things I'll be looking at over the course of the next week and a half. As I said, Creighton's going to be challenged, going to Villanova for a rematch, going to host Providence, and then play at Xavier. That's 3 games in about, a 10-day stretch that could be, really telling. Just one from a progress report standpoint of how they deal with sort of the back-to-back-to-back challenges, but also when we look back, say we're in March and we're wondering where the Jays' resume is, if they're on the right side of the bubble or on the wrong side of the bubble, we might be looking at this stretch right here. That's how pivotal it might be. So we'll see how the Jays handle it. That's all I got for you today. Appreciate you watching. Follow all our coverage on omaha.com on Creighton basketball and other Creighton sports. We got you locked and loaded. It's January, so basketball season. We got plenty of coverage for you and plenty of stuff to write about. So I appreciate you guys following along, and we'll see you next week.